Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Grace Hatfield from EHS Daily Advisor, and thank you for tuning in today to this episode of Faces of EHS. This is a segment where we feature environmental health and safety professionals and highlight their journeys and hear their thoughts about EHS trends and issues. Today, we are joined by Dr. John Austin, who is the CEO and founder of Reaching Results. So, John, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Grace. Thanks. How are you?
Good. Good. I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking. So let's jump right in. Can you tell us a little bit about your position at Reaching Results and what you do as a company?
Yeah, sure. At Reaching Results, what we try to do is create, I think of it as my why, really,
Hmm.
is we try to help leaders create safer work environments. And, if we want to dive a little deeper, which we
Hmm.
will in this interview, I guess,
Yeah.
and, most of that involves creating the right environment to get the kinds of behaviors you want from people
Hmm.
and that they want from themselves.
Gotcha. So how did you get your start in EHS?
Yeah, so going back to college days, that's kind of when I first started I should make a clarification here. I consider myself, I work in EHS, but I'm a
Hmm.
behavioral psychologist. So
Yeah.
I'm not like all the other EHS people necessarily, right? Like I don't have EHS training. What I have is training in behavioral science.
Hmm.
And so if I were to think about how I got started in the field, the way that it started for me was my first course on behavioral science, which I took at the University of Notre Dame um, forever ago, like in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so during that time, I took a course from a guy named Chris Anderson, Dr. Chris Anderson, who was a behavioral psychologist. And my first job in academia, in like an academic setting, was working in Chris Anderson's rat lab, where I
Hmm.
took care of his rats and got to handle them and gentle them
Oh, that's
and that
cool.
sort of thing and care for the rats, which is, some people may think like, ew, but it was actually really cool. I got to care for
Yeah.
animals and stuff like that. So I learned a lot about behavior there. Interestingly, like the thing that grabbed me when I first took that course, I still remember the very first lecture in introductory psychology that Chris Anderson taught,
Hmm.
and I was 17 at the time. And he started the lecture by saying, "I'm going to teach you how to get anyone to love you,
Hmm.
anyone you want in the world to love you." And I was like, "Wait a minute." This sounds interesting. The rest of that stuff is okay and I'll study it and everything, but like this sounds actually useful. And so, I mean, that's a really kind of crass way to put it, but
Hmm.
to the ears of a 17-year-old, it was like, wait a minute, there's something we can actually do with psychology, um,
Yeah.
right? Something I can use on a day-to-day basis. So that's kind of what grabbed me initially. And safety is not necessarily all about getting people to love us, but it is about developing relationships with people
Mhm.
and trying to help them say and do the right thing, and to make sure we are all creating the safest environment possible, right? So like
Yeah.
that's the older me language, or way of putting that 17-year-old's words, right? So I started there at Notre Dame, and then I once I found behavioral psychology, I realized that everything else is just like interesting but not useful.
Mhm.
And uh, but behavioral psychology, that's something you can use every day. And so I decided to go to grad school at that point, once I graduated. And so I went to Florida State University, where I worked with a guy named Dr. John Bailey, who's really well known academic and practitioner in applied behavior analysis. And applied behavior analysis is a larger field than just kind of I should say it's a specific area in behavioral psychology.
Mhm.
Um, where it started was in developmental disabilities and helping people who had severe mental and physical disabilities to live a normal life. And so like that was like in the 60s, right? And then, but it also kind of then those a lot of those techniques spread into business. And so when I was at Florida State, I got to work with kids who have autism, with their
Mhm.
parents, with their teachers, with other kids who had other kind of quote behavior problems in the schools. But it didn't end there. What I realized, and what I was taught there by Dr. Bailey, was that behavior is everywhere.
Hmm.
And anything we learn about behavioral science can be applied in lots of different areas. So we worked in the environment. We improved recycling and carpooling and energy use and stuff like that. But with them, we also worked in organizations and we improved leadership and we improved safety and we improved productivity and quality and all that sort of thing. So that was a really cool experience for me. I got to work in lots of different environments over about a 5-year period, closely supervised by an expert in behavior,
Hmm.
and that got me really hooked. And so I became a professor at Western Michigan University in applied behavior analysis, and I was a professor for about 15 years, where I published 100 research papers that no one will ever read, because they're written in academic language, right? Academic
Yeah,
speak, and they're not very accessible.
gotcha.
Um, if you have trouble sleeping, though, just like hit me up, and I can help you out there by giving you some articles to read. So like I think along the way there, the point of this story, I'll land the plane here, is that over time I learned that behavior's everywhere. We know a lot about it in the science,
Hmm.
and yet we hide it away in libraries, in academic research publications and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and so my mission for the last like 15 years or so has been to take what we know about behavior and put it in simple terms so that people can use it.
Hmm.
And if we're able to do that on a larger scale, we can save lives. We can save lots and lots of lives at work and on the roads.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a really, really good way of looking at it. So I guess my next question is, what is your best mistake and what did you learn from it?
That's a really good one. I think, this is really related to what I just said. And that was that, for 15 years, I worked with students, graduate and undergraduate students, and colleagues and peers around the world, really trying to produce the best behavioral science research
Hmm.
so that we could publish it. And then, once the data is out there, then everybody would have access to it because everybody goes to university libraries and reads super thick, boring academic publications. And
Yeah.
once they saw the data, they would be able to change. They'd be able to use it. And so like I spent years of my life doing that, and it was valuable in its own way, but it wasn't the way to get to where I wanted to go, right? So the big
Hmm.
mistake was assuming that when you have the data, people will pay attention to it and then respond to it. And I think that applies to anybody who's in business right now, like a safety professional. You've got data showing that something you did worked. A lot of people will not respond to that,
Yeah.
right? Like what you
Hmm.
need instead, or in addition to the data, is the language, the proper language. You need
Yeah.
the right relationships in place so that people will actually pay attention to what you're saying for more than a few seconds.
Yeah, the
You need a
discussion
good
section.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Of the
Yeah.
academic papers. Yeah, right.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then you need to learn to tell a good story
Hmm.
around it. I mean that pulls in what people care about. Find out what your audience cares about and speak to that.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's the biggest mistake is assuming that if you have the data, people are gonna like come and get it,
Hmm.
and it takes a whole lot more than that actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what is your favorite and least favorite part about working in EHS? And is there anything that you would change?
Yeah, this is an easy one. My favorite part is helping leaders to use the science of behavior to save lives.
Hmm.
Like and I can talk about that for days, longer than anybody wants to listen. Um, but my least favorite part is really it's an element of human nature, and that is judgment. And
Mm.
what I mean by that is that we often see someone do something that we don't agree with, and this is not just in safety, this is just like human condition. We see somebody do something we don't agree with, and we think we know why, and we
Hmm.
ascribe the causes in our own head without ever really asking the right questions or understanding why they do what they do. And
Yeah.
so it's that idea that we rush to judgment. We're quick to judge and we're slow to understand.
Hmm.
and that is super frustrating to me. And so I can do something about that. And that's like what I do about it is that I teach behavioral science, because as you start to understand behavior, you know that you can't possibly know in your head without asking some questions or collecting some data why somebody does what they do.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
nobody comes to work trying to get hurt, planning to get hurt. They had a plan. They had a different plan, and it wasn't getting injured,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So just to put it in safety terms, if you want to look through your injuries and your corrective actions, and if you see something like complacency on there, you're judging. If you see
Mhm.
something like retraining every time, now sometimes that is the right thing, but it's so easy to like fall back on that as a crutch. You're blaming the person. You're saying,
Yeah.
well, they weren't properly trained, or they weren't paying attention, or they didn't. But what you should be doing is looking at the environment that you and other leaders have created for that person
Mhm.
to do the behaviors that might have gotten them injured.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's definitely more systemic. That's one of the things I've learned in talking to you and a lot of your other colleagues who I've interviewed so far. It's definitely not a personal failing,
No.
getting hurt at work. So,
Yeah, and I mean, if I can say something else about that real quick, I mean, I
yeah, of
think this
course.
is, this is like the root of a lot of what's going on in our society today, right now.
Hmm.
People don't take a minute to understand where other people are coming from.
Yeah.
I mean, I have friends who are just like we all do on Facebook, who have very oppositional views to like my own views,
Hmm.
and most people just like unfriend or whatever, and that makes it really easy for you to have a little happy bubble. But
Yeah.
instead, why not just like ask a couple
Yeah.
of questions and try to really understand their perspective, and try to model that, because wouldn't we have a
Mhm.
much better society if we could just talk to each other?
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. And on your website, I was doing my research and I saw something on there that says it's a basic human right to have a safe place to work. So could you talk more about that and kind of, um, I guess tell me a little bit about how company leaders can really make safety a priority in their organizations?
Yeah. I'm glad you saw that. That's great. I mean, that's been something that I've been saying for years now. And I would
Hmm.
say probably about like 5 years ago, I could say it without there being kind of a like, who is this weirdo,
Hmm.
kind of reaction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it seems weird to me that we live in this society that is so advanced in so many different ways, and yet we still kill thousands of people a year getting done
Hmm.
what we get done. And then if you widen that to driver safety, it's hundreds of thousands. It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there's usually a solution that if it were implemented, we could have gotten a different result.
Hmm.
And so I think the more leaders think of safety or having a safe environment as the responsibility of the organization, the further
Hmm.
we'll get. Now, I mean, I'm sure people will find a 1% or 2% thing that, like, okay, that wasn't our responsibility. That was a personal choice and yada, yada. Okay, yeah, fine. But that doesn't change the fact that we would make a lot more progress if we had the mindset that,
Hmm.
yeah, we're going to do what we can to create a safe work environment, and that it should be a basic human right to have that, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to the people who, uh, you know, on whose hard labor our business and our wealth and our opportunities are built, and
Hmm.
their opportunities too. But like, I mean, I don't know. I'm somebody who came from a blue collar family. Nobody in my college, nobody in my family went to college except for me.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I was surrounded by people who worked hard for a living and just wanted to put food on the table. And they
Hmm.
were often put in unsafe work environments just to be able to do that. And
Yeah.
so it's something that I'm really passionate about. Like, nobody should be it shouldn't be part of the job to get hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
I agree.
I'll tell you that, lots of manufacturing settings that I've worked in where I've interviewed employees about, they're working with razor blades, cutting flashing, let's say, and they don't have gloves on, and they're bare razor blades. And you say, well,
Mhm.
why would you do that? And they're like, well, this is the way to get the job done. Like, I can't really do it with gloves. I'm like, well, what about your fingers? And they're like, oh, cutting yourself is just like part of the job. And they're
No.
they're trying to convince me that it's okay, right?
Yeah, that's not okay.
And
Yeah.
so we've brainwashed people into thinking that it's okay to get hurt on the job. And if you do, you're sucking it up. You're a team member. You're doing a good job. That
Yeah.
couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
So I think that's the key here, is thinking about this as a basic human right. And so what can leaders do about it? They could say that.
Mhm.
They could put that out there. They could also, I think, get better at asking the right questions and
Mhm.
having the right conversations with the right people. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot there. I do a whole course now. I've been asked over the past several years to teach more and more about how do we ask questions uh, to create a productive conversation and a safe
Mhm.
conversation. How do we have those conversations so that it kind of advances the game and moves things along and makes people feel included and safe at work,
Mhm.
right? But the better leaders can get at that, uh, the payoffs are immense. I
Mhm.
mean, you start to see all kinds of different interesting things happen that are beyond safety, but involving creativity and innovation. And when people find the courage to speak up and they're not punished for it, they're in fact rewarded for it.
Mhm.
You get all kinds of things you didn't expect.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are your thoughts on safety culture as a concept, and, do you think how do you think people should implement that in their workplaces?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think safety culture is it's easy to make this really confusing.
Mhm.
You can have safety culture climate surveys, and climate is a real thing, I suppose. But really, what it is it's a label that we've put on the actions of people.
Mhm.
So, like, let's just, if we want to cut through all of the theory and the academic understanding of it and all that, that's all it is. It's culture is what we call how people behave each day. And
Mhm.
if you wanted to get even more specific, I learned this from Aubrey Daniels and Judy Agnew many years ago.
Mhm.
Culture is what our leaders and our coworkers reinforce and punish.
Mhm.
And so in behavioral language, that means what do we reward and what do we discourage
Yeah.
in our everyday interactions with people.
Mhm.
And that is what defines our culture. So, culture is a thing. It will always be a thing. We
Mhm.
can study it, and then it becomes a different thing. We can write big books and reports; it becomes a different thing, right? But if you wanted to
Yeah.
influence the culture, the way you do it is by getting people to reinforce and punish different behaviors,
Mhm.
and then pretty soon, each moment, each day, you've got a more and more different culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So where do you see the industry heading in the future? Maybe in like 5 years? Are you seeing any current trends now?
Yeah, I think we'll. I hope that we will, and I think I've got evidence for this too. That we're going to measure more when it comes to what people say and do. We're getting
Mhm.
better and better at measuring behavior,
Mhm.
and AI is part of that, right? Like that's a big deal. And right now AI is measuring things like, are people wearing the proper PPE, or what do the work conditions look like, the physical conditions. But
Mhm.
before too long, AI is going to also be useful to us in measuring behavior. I mean,
Mhm.
you saw it a little bit during COVID, where people were selling these sensors that uh, helped you to physically distance from each other, right? Like your sensor would go off if you were closer than 6 feet
Oh,
from each
wow.
other. So I
Yeah.
saw that some, in technology and stuff. The thing
Mhm.
about it is that, just like anything, interesting new technology can be misused, and it can create a really distrustful environment. I mean, if you
Mhm.
think about like AI measuring your behavior, that sounds a little scary right now.
Mhm.
So it's all about how do we use it and how do we create a more positive environment by measuring. And so I think that's where things are going. People are understanding the power of measurement. They're understanding the power of behavior.
Mhm.
And they're just now starting to scratch the surface of how do we use it to create good
Mhm.
in the world. There's a book that everybody should read that's not an EHS book. It's called The Nurture Effect by
Mm,
Tony Biglin. He came and spoke at one of our conferences, and he's a friend and colleague of mine, and long-term, late career behavioral psychologist. And he talks about the power of nurture in in our upbringing, and
mhm,
how if you grew up in a very coercive, that's kind of the opposite, the opposing force of nurture. If you grew up in a really coercive household, you're more likely to have depression. You're more likely to end up in jail. You're less likely to finish school. You have a lower income, all kinds of things, and you're more
mhm,
likely to be coercive to your own kids and family.
mhm,
Whereas if you grew up in a more nurturing household, you get the inverse of all those things. And so the book talks about a science of nurture, and that's really behavioral science and what we're talking about in safety. So I think we could. There are a lot of concepts in there that we being behavioral psychologists have applied in other areas
mhm.
that we could bring into EHS more and do more good.
Yeah. Yeah, so, to kind of switch gears a little bit, what are you most proud of in your life, whether it be professional, personal, anything you wanna say?
Definitely my family.
Mhm.
I have a son who's a teenager and like amazing person, and I have a wife who created him and like blows me away every day. You know, both of them
Yeah,
are just what I'm grateful for sure. And all this
yeah,
work, they allow me to do all this work, and so like that's the order of things. You know,
yeah,
um, so yeah, for sure. I'll say no more
yeah.
about that.
So, do you have any advice for people entering the EHS world?
Yeah, sure. Um, I think the more you can learn, the better. If
Mhm,
you get to work with a great leader in safety or in operations or in anywhere, stop what you're doing and follow them, and find a way to work closely with them and
mhm,
get as much really painful feedback from them as you can.
mhm. Yeah.
Like let your ego go and like just want behave near them so they can respond and teach you, right?
Mhm,
And like thank them for that. Like that's my advice. I mean, the times when I've grown the most during my career have been times like that. In undergrad it was, it was, well, in high school I had it, in elementary school I had it,
mhm,
in college I had a person who I already talked about. In grad school, I had a person who I already talked about like that. And then professionally and at the university, in every part of my life, I've had someone like that. And I think
mhm.
it's just transformative.
Yeah,
You learn more than you could from a book or from just kind of through osmosis. So put yourself
yeah,
out there, accept the feedback, ask for it, be thankful, be grateful for it. And I haven't always done that. It's hard, but like learn to do that, aspire to do that, and you'll grow faster than you ever thought you would.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been absolutely lovely, and I'm sure our audience will love to hear everything that you have to say.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me here. I appreciate it, Grace. If I can ever do anything to help you or any of your listeners, just I hope they reach out and say hi.